So we have three real purposes here. One is to basically prevent the epidemic of brain disorders, much like we have done with a lot of infectious diseases. Infectious diseases are an epidemic of an infection. Alzheimer's and dementia is an epidemic caused by demography. And so we ought to be attacking it with the same scope, scale, and passion as we did with COVID and other diseases. The second purpose is to focus on this life course issue of how to build the resilience of the brain starting in the first 1,000 days of your life and moving through autism to Alzheimer's, but also through mental health and all the intermediate factors during the course of your life, which affect your brain health during your life and into your later years. So second purpose is to understand that in terms not just of disease, but also resilience, how workforce productivity can be enhanced in an era where changing demography means we have fewer working age populations to support larger total populations. If we don't improve the productivity of our workforce here and around the world, particularly in the global south, we are going to be basically experiencing a significant drop in mankind's and womankind's economic material wealth. So these are two main purposes. And the third is collaboration. We basically need a whole set of changes in a variety of systems, from research to education to workforce and the like. How do we basically convene with a lot of players to begin to change each of those in ways that reinforce, don't necessarily have one place, one person, or one organization do it, but nobody can do it alone. But if we don't do it together, we're not going to go very far. So this notion of a collaboration, and the Brain House embodies that idea, which is a convening force that brings these change agents together to basically work in parallel and reinforcing ways to enhance the resilience of our brains and our brain health. This particular panel is going to be very interesting. You're going to see quite a range of views here, and it's going to be moderated by Susan Sadigova of Foreign Policy Magazine. Susan, thank you so very much for doing this.
Thank you so much, George. Pleasure to be here, of course. Thank you to George, to the Brain House, and Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative for hosting us. I believe this is the first time we have a Brain House in Davos. Very much needed conversation. Just to clarify, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I'm really excited about the topic, and I know you don't have to be one to appreciate the fact that brain health is something that we can all relate to. It impacts us in one way or another, directly, indirectly. So what we want to accomplish with this panel specifically today, and I have to say we're really lucky to have the best experts I can imagine on this topic. What we want to accomplish is spend some time to define the challenge and make it as specific as we can without getting too technical, but at the same time, we want to spend time to talk about solutions that already exist, preventative strategies, what is already out there, policy tools, tech breakthroughs, or anything that can be taken to market, expanded, replicated. So I'm really excited about that part. But as I said, it's important to define the challenge, first of all. So maybe we'll spend a few minutes doing that. I'll introduce our panelists very quickly. We have Dr. Murali Doraiswamy from Duke University, professor of psychiatry and geriatrics. We have Dr. Tom Oxley, founder and CEO of Synchron in New York, former minister to Foreign Affairs of Ecuador with long career in diplomatic service, Minister Luis Gallegos, Dr. Paul Cherukuri from Chief Innovation Office of Rice University, and of course, Patrick Brannelly, the founder and CEO of the 10,000 Brains Project. Like I said, it doesn't get better than this. And maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Murali, and you coming from the scientific perspective to this conversation as you think about brain health and challenges and all the impacts, ranging from climate change, nutrition insecurity, anything else, mental health, obviously. How would you define the challenge as a scientist in a few words?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And so this is a cognitive revolution. You see signs of AI in every shop. And the biggest asset that we as a society have is our brain health and our So the biggest two threats are obviously mental illness and neurological diseases. These are the biggest causes of disability and distress to the patient and the individual. Probably 1 billion people suffering from mental illnesses, probably over 150, 200 million people who are going to be suffering from dementing disorders or at risk for developing dementing disorders. I think as George pointed out, early childhood risk factors, midlife risk factors are very, very crucial. And we as a society have not paid enough attention to it. There's a saying, healthy neurons lead to happy and prosperous neighborhoods. We are born with almost all of the neurons that we have throughout our adult life, and between the ages of 0 and 3 is when the brain really shapes itself into what is going to set the trajectory for the child's life. And that influences everything. So James Heckman, a Nobel laureate, won a Nobel Prize for discovering that every $1 you invest in that time frame, you can get up to $60 return on investment for society. There are many, many challenges. The first challenge is we have to create an observatory to monitor brain health. How do we get data sharing, different countries, different universities, even different clinics to share their data? How do we create an observatory to monitor? Because if we cannot measure, we cannot manage. How do we empower consumers to take charge of their own brain health? Can we create a simple number, a brain number, or a cognitive reserve number, or a resilience number? Because numbers motivate people to take charge, like cholesterol did for cardiovascular risk, for example. And the third is, in this era of AI and digital tools, how do we bring together digital tools, medical tools, and consumer education tools to create a global platform to ensure mental well-being? And that's one of the things that DAC is doing so well. And last but not least, today's a day we are celebrating Martin Luther King. So we should forget that it's not just about white brains or about rich brains. Neurodiversity is very important. We need to address brain health needs of every single brain, all 8 billion brains throughout the world. So they need to be accessible, they need to be, it cannot be super costly, it has to be safe. So that's very, very important goal. So I'm going to end with that.
Yeah, thank you, sir, very much. I like that happy health and neurons leads to happy societies. That's probably one of the good takeaways from today. Maybe I'll come to you, Paul, next. I think you're coming from academic perspective as well. If we keep that going, what do you see as a challenge right now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep talking. And I'll try to project even. Yeah, it looks like it's working. So I'm Chief Innovation Officer for RICE. RICE is a remarkable institution that's really evolving with higher education as it's evolving as well. And although I'm sort of an academic, but I also came from pharma, and so I've been in the real world, and so where my eyes were opened. And so we have, because of our incredible president, Reggie DeRoche, and our provost, Amy Dittmar, we have a leadership in place to really solve practical problems, and especially in regards to the brain. So in Houston, we have the world's largest medical center. I think you probably heard that from Jochen up there. I'm not looking at God, I'm looking at a semi-God, who is the president of UTMB. So he's right up there, and we are great partners in Texas to try to drive this brain economy and this brain transition forward. What we're seeing is similar to what you just said, actually. We're one of the problems, there's two problems that we've identified at RICE that we are working with the clinicians at the medical center, and that's in measurement and modulation. So how do you actually measure the brain and the brain performance? We don't have all the tools that we need to really see into the brain and see its activity as finitely as we can, right? The actual chemical pathways or the electrons that are traveling through. How do you actually understand that? Our tools are rather crude. And so that recognition has led to the neuroengineering initiative at RICE. We have a $30 million investment that we put in as an initial investment. We're expanding that through partnerships, but also a lot of individuals who have come up to us and saying that this is one of the best things that we've done, because we've recognized that the brain is, I think we all know this, that it's the most important organ in our body, and it is the one that is really driving the growth of society. And we are in the knowledge economy, right? You think of universities. Well, the knowledge economy is driven by how we think, and how we think is evolving. And how we actually perform is getting much more important, especially as our lifespan increases. Our health span needs to increase commensurate with that. So our investments are going towards that. Once we measure it, can we modulate it? And can we modulate it without the deleterious effects that we're seeing currently through standard pharmacotherapeutics? So what can we do? We're creating new devices, and we have new kind of pathways that we've explored through engineering principles to see if we can, we always say measure twice, cut once. We actually don't want to cut in this case. What we want to be able to do is actually non-invasively modulate the brain so that we can have better performance. The military has actually come to us many times saying that could we actually help them in particular. And this sort of dual-use technology is what we're also exploring. If we can help the soldier perform better, we can then transfer that to society broadly and then have new technology that comes out. In the innovation sort of history, you see that often, so it's not an unusual thing. But it's wonderful to start to see that some of these sort of DoD applications in the US level is something that we can actually use for society in a broader way. And I think those kinds of partnerships, as well as with innovative universities and also bringing the capital together, is what really is leading the innovation side of our house. Because it's not enough to do the research, which is great to understand, but can we actually apply it, translate it, and get it into clinics? It's a very long pathway. And many people are suffering along that path. So the shorter time frame that we can do it, the better off we are. So our focus is that, measure, modulate at speed and scale as quickly as possible, not only in the Texas Triangle, but globally. But we use the Texas Triangle as our test bed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Sounds like you have a lot of solutions to share, so I'll definitely come back
Yeah,
to
we
you
should.
later. But it's, as you said, right, it's not just it's not just a matter of innovating, how do you get it to the end user. So a big part of it's sometimes policy too, so maybe it's a good segue to turn to Minister Luis Gallegos. You've been in diplomatic career, had a diplomatic career for a long time, been an ambassador to UN, among many other postings. From where you're sitting, obviously, based on your work, I'm just curious, what do you see as a state of land when it comes to brain health in the policy community?
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to talk from my position as president of the Global Initiative on Aging Foundation, Aging and Longevity Foundation. I was a diplomat. Now I'm dedicated to looking into this demographic shift that has changed the world, because we're 1 billion people aging at the moment. Normally, the UN calculates, I'm also the president of UNITAR, which is an agency of the United Nations for research and training. We normally calculate a direct impact group of 2 people. So when you talk about 1 billion people, you're talking about really a cohort of 3 billion people directly involved, be them family related or caretakers or health officials. But I think the daunting issue is that in 25 years, by the year 2050, we will be more than 2 billion people aging, past 65 years, with an impact group of 4 billion. So we're talking about 6 billion people in the world. And we're talking about the progression, like George said a few minutes ago. The problem is demographics. We can look at these diseases, we can look at a number of issues, but I find that there is a lack of vision by policymakers to understand the complexity of this, or maybe understanding the complexity, they prefer to kick the can down the road for the next guy to solve it. Because it has so many effects on your economy, on your funding, on your health systems, on your budgetary aspects, on your medical establishment. It has undoubtedly an issue of work. Many societies that are aging have substituted workforce by migration. But we're seeing a tendency of eliminating migration, and therefore you're going to have a problem in decreasing the capabilities of societies because of that. One of the most important issues I see is the need for worldwide legislation. So what we're promoting now is the negotiation of a convention, a UN convention very similar to the one we have for disability that covers and protects 1.3 billion people with disabilities, that I had the honor to chair in the UN. But we need a convention to protect the rights and make it obligatory for the states to manage these issues. It cannot be done on a voluntary stage. And I'm very happy to announce that we have obtained from the General Assembly a resolution And I hope that by March we will have a Human Rights Council resolution to begin a negotiation of a convention that will be the guideline for the majority of countries on how to deal with the problems of dignity of aging. Being a person who's aging, I also have to end this conversation by saying, and the dignity of dying, because humanity has not taught us the basic aspect that you're going to die, and you should do it with a dignity that is inherent to human beings.
Yeah, we're not ending yet, but that's a good note to finish on this this part. And as you said, it's a huge number, 2 billion by 2050, and it's not just a matter of health, but it's also a matter of economic opportunities, workforce. I'll go to you, Patrick, next. You are the founder of 10,000 Brains Project. Maybe you could tell us what that is, and if anything you want to complement and add to what has already been said, please welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Murali and Luis have already laid out the global challenges that we have, the trends that are affecting brain resilience. We've got a mental health crisis globally, growing numbers of people who are suffering from these disorders throughout the lifespan. And then we've got the aging of society. And I'll point out that the majority of new cases in dementia over the next 50 years are not going to be in North America and in Europe. They're going to be in Africa and in the Middle East and in Asia, Latin America. We have to solve this on a global scale. And so we have to think about global collaboration. The Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative is doing tremendously important work to address these disorders in Africa and in Asia and in Latin America, bringing to bear cross-border collaborations to do that, and we'll talk about some of those today. The 10,000 Brains Project was founded a year and a half ago, basically as a natural outgrowth of the work and what I learned while I was at Gates Ventures working on the Alzheimer's Disease Data Initiative in a large number of partnerships with the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative. We have a lot of work to do in the space, and we have to cut across sectors to do it. I think the challenges have been laid out. I think the one that I will add is that we have to embrace the problem for what it is. The brain is the most complex puzzle that we can deal with in medicine. Every brain is different. That's why we're called the 10,000 Brains Project. Every human brain is different, and it's constantly changing. We know that these disorders differ in women versus men. We need a lot more female researchers to look at the nuances of these disorders and to prioritize the very legitimate needs we have for different treatments for different types of people. We need to get people from the Global South involved in research. They will see things in the data that we don't see in North America or in Europe. We need to make full use of the full talent pool globally. And we need to understand how to bring personalized medicine to everyone around the globe. So these challenges of dealing with the complexity of the brain and then how to scale up solutions globally, these are important discussions that we have to have. And I'm glad that there are some other non-neuroscientists in the room, because we all have a role to play in bringing these things to scale. The neuroscientists have a lot of answers for us, but they need resources and they need collaborations with other sectors of society in order for us to have impact for real people. The 10,000 Brains Project works at this interface between data science, neurodegeneration, and personalized medicine. And we're taking this view down the pathway to address all of the barriers that we need to think about in order to get real impact for real people. So we're looking at helping to generate data sets globally for more diverse populations so that our models in AI will not be biased. We are looking at training a new generation of AI-savvy neuroscientists. We're looking at addressing the very important ethical issues. We are changing the relationship between patients and their data, patients and their doctors. And these are all ethical challenges that need to be addressed proactively, not as afterthoughts. So we are looking at research in these areas and bringing people together, stakeholders from around the world, in order to reach consensus. And of course, we need a lot more funding for the talented researchers who are trying to take innovations all the way through to the clinic.
That's great. Thank you so much, Patrick. I'll turn over to Tom next. Before the session, Tom, I was told that you're the founder of CEO Synchron. I was told you do a lot of cool things, and you're also an expert in brain-computer interfaces. I don't know what that means. Maybe you could tell us.
Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Tom. I'm a neurologist. I've been building a technology for 12 years. But before I go into that, I just want to. I think I'll speak from the technology side and maybe the more commercial side. I have a startup and I've stopped practice now and in the field of BCI. I was at San Francisco last week at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, and NVIDIA gave this incredible presentation, and they laid out the future of AI in healthcare. And one of the three areas was digital devices. And they had two areas in digital devices: brain-computer interface and robotics. So BCI has, a lot of people still haven't heard of it, but it's coming up very quick, and it's positioned to have a huge impact in the field of neurology. So when I started neurology training in Australia, I remember being on the wards and looking after patients with stroke and ALS and various diseases. And the orthopedic surgeons would always laugh at you, say, "Why are you doing neurology? You can diagnose everything, but you can't treat anything. Why would you?" You probably had that as well. It's like you're the butt of the jokes of the other, more glamorous surgeon types. And but I was obsessed with the brain. And now, 20 years later, I just saw that in technology and devices, neuro has come up to top of the list of investment. So it's now, now it's sexy. Now it's like the final frontier is the brain, and the dollars are now following. And so venture capital is now coming in. There's huge investment coming in. Neuralink has had a huge impact in a positive way in the field as well. And now NVIDIA have highlighted what this is. And I've come to realize so the history of neurotechnology in the brain is primarily, so I think of that as devices put inside the brain to do things. And traditionally, it's been deep brain stimulation for a range of applications. There are some other monitoring systems, but there hasn't really been you think of a brain-computer interface as a device in the brain that creates a live stream out of the brain. So the BCI can be thought of like a neuroprosthesis. It has to restore some level of brain function, and the first wave is in motor disorders. But what's happened is the technology is very effective, but it's been hard to scale. And so any treatment that requires craniotomy, and I think you just mentioned minimally invasive approaches, there was this whole revolution in cardiac over the last 30 years where you no longer get open heart surgery. Everything's done through a catheter, through a wrist, goes up into your heart. That revolution has now come to neuro. It's called neurointervention, and it's one of the fastest growing, and I'm happy to say sexiest areas in medicine, attracting the best young physicians. And it's just at the beginning of this incredible cycle. So that's what my company does, is we're delivering electronics up into the brain, and we're trying to overcome motor disorders. But it's a very exciting time for investment and innovation in neurotechnology. Yeah.
Thank you for that. They were right. You do cool things. So that's impressive. Now that we talked about problems, I think we get into the good part of how we actually solve them, right? And I also want this to feel like an interactive conversation. If you have any questions, any point, I met some really brilliant people in the audience earlier. Please raise your hand, and we'll integrate your question as well. I'll come to you, Murali, if you don't mind. Again, as I said, we want to talk about preventative strategies. We want to talk about solutions. We want to talk about breakthroughs, anything that's on the horizon. That as you speak to the community of businesses and web investors, hopefully there are some here in the audience as well. What would you want them to hear, and what would you want people to take away as a specific solution?
Well, thank you. So, hello? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to, brain diseases is a big topic. Once brain cells have been severely damaged or are dead, we have no way to bring them back, at least as of now, until the cool guys come up with gene therapy and new neuromodulation techniques. So right now, our best hope is prevention. And there's this old saying, genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. So the good news is a bunch of the diseases of the brain are very heavily driven by lifestyle. So dementia, the estimate is something like 40% of the risk for dementia is lifestyle driven. And there's some good news. If you look at, even though the overall prevalence of dementia is going to be rising as we live longer, if you look at consecutive birth cohorts over the last 40 years, the risk of dementia has dropped by about 36% if you were born in, say, the 1920s or 1930s, compared to, say, if you were born in the 1950s or 1960s. That's because mandatory education in schools, you're building up greater cognitive reserve, better nutrition, more cohesive sort of social bonds, less World War II effects. So a number of factors, our overall sort of socioeconomic status has improved. Working environment has also improved. But a number of new risk factors have emerged over time, such as obesity is a big example. Diabetes is another big example. Perhaps climate, the threat of climate change. So I think what we need to do is come up with better ways to create a personalized risk profile for each person. Know your number. Like each person has a number of risk. What is your risk for Alzheimer's? We can now, with AI, using some of the large databases, actually predict a person's risk for AI, for Alzheimer's disease, even 20, 30 years before they've developed the problem. We can even predict your risk for when you're going to die, plus or minus 5 years, even though the study investigators have not actually informed the subjects about it because they'll freak out if you tell people exactly when you're going to die. That'll be like an astrologer territory. So the common things that you can do, many of those can actually be monitored by your phone. For example, Apple now has a heart monitoring device to detect something called atrial fibrillation, which is a big risk factor for strokes. Strokes can lead to dementia. Apple has introduced a hearing platform that can test your hearing loss, and it can actually change your earbuds to prevent further worsening and maybe even improve your hearing loss. Now, the Apple Watch has a monitor that can monitor your sleep and your risk for sleep apnea, which is another risk for dementia. So these kinds of tools are now very, very promising, and they're coming together. We now have blood tests. And my prediction is in the next 5 years, we will have, with one drop of blood, you can predict your risk for the 50 most common neurological disorders. Whether or not insurance companies will pay for it is not clear, but the technology is already available. So we're going to be able to scale our risk assessment. We're going to be able to personalize the prescription of lifestyle interventions for an individual based on this profile. So I'm very optimistic about what the future holds.
That's great to know as someone headed in that direction, so there will be good solutions out in the market. Paul? Yeah, sure. Your name and affiliation, please.
Sorry, the technology is not there yet for the blood test. That was Theranos. So
I'm sorry?
Theranos, remember the Theranos story that they wanted to detect everything through a drop of blood. So my point to you, the technology is not there yet.
So I would respectfully disagree. And let me tell you, have you heard of GRAIL? So GRAIL already has a test with blood. You can detect the risk for 50 common cancers. So currently, we have blood tests. There are 4 markers of Alzheimer's. There are 6 markers of ALS, 3 markers of Parkinson's, many of which are currently going through FDA clearance. And it's very elementary to develop what's called as a multiplex assay to put all of these into a single panel to measure with a blood test. So Theranos did not choose the route of going through FDA clearance. They partnered instead with CVS and did a completely different route to approach. And they had some shenanigans going on, which I don't want to get into. But the newer companies like Roche, Lilly, I don't think they can be compared with the Theranoses. Okay, well,
All right, moving on. Tech is there. Paul, the next question, once you have the solution, innovation, how do you actually take it to the market? What needs to happen so, like I said earlier, end user get access to it, and how long is the process? Can we make it faster?
Yeah, that's a very big question. So it's one of the things that we see inside of academia and now starting to recognize is that a lot of times our discoveries come out too early, and we don't cook them up long enough before they become a viable technology that you can then actually get into the market. So many startup companies fail, not like Theranos failed. Theranos was a different example. But the genuine companies that are not cheating are actually trying to get out to the market so fast because venture capital is really driving these projects. But they're still very much a research project trying to become a company, a product company. What we're doing is recognizing that, so what we're putting in is venture vehicles inside of academic institutions, cook it up a little bit longer, de-risk it, and then it's more bankable. That way we can accelerate, because what happens is a company goes out, they say we've got a great product, the VCs fund it, the VCs find out you haven't had enough data, and you can't move along. And that slows down the process. So by doing it faster inside the house, we can accelerate. The other thing is policy. I think one of the problems that we do have is these new technologies that are coming out. If the policy doesn't catch up with it right from the beginning, you're going to have issues, right? So you got to go out and get the sort of legislative armament right out there right at the beginning. So at Rice, we have the Baker Institute, the James A. Baker Institute. It's one of the world-class leading think tanks in public policy, and we have a lot of influence in DC. So we engage very, very early to make sure that our companies, that our technology is well known to DC insiders, as well as on the FDA side and the venture. All of it is early conversations, right? And one of the other things that you don't want to do is oversell. And in academia, we are great at overselling because we know how to make PowerPoints really, really well. And I think it's a very, very big difference between doing that and actually making the thing. And having brilliant, physicians who are actually working with engineers to design all these things, I think is also one of the key aspects. We pulled all those pieces together, recognizing that we have some startups that have come out. We have Motif is one of our companies. Just to make a plug for that, I think it's a fantastic company by Jacob Robinson, one of our top professors, who's being able to do this transcranial magnetic stimulation at home. That's his device. So instead of, if anybody is familiar with that, there's many depressive people who are suffering from depression. They go into the hospital, they sit under a large power magnetic stimulator, and they have to be in that position or be in that treatment period for a week. So they have to take this time out and do this. This startup is solving that by having this kind of minimally invasive implant that sits right underneath the skull, and then you put on a cap to stimulate, and you can do this at home on your app, right? So that isn't science fiction, that's an actual device that's actually moving through the process. But those sorts of things, one of the things that Jacob has found and what Rice has found is that we've got to help our startups get out there and get that sort of infrastructure in place. We can do that as a university, we can do that as innovators, we can do that as entrepreneurs, but you have to have that collective to do that acceleration. I think that's one of the interesting key parts of it.
No, that's definitely fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I think going back to Minister, you started talking about the upcoming UN resolution, the worldwide, kind of pushing for worldwide legislation or convention that will get a lot of countries sign up and kind of do more on the higher level. It's a challenging job. I mean, I work at foreign policy. It's our job is to describe and talk about how countries do not get along. How do you envision that coming along? And as you think through, global cooperation and partnerships, is that the way forward?
You bring up a point that's very relevant because we are in a very challenging time in the world with the geopolitical contentions and with a number of things. When we began, and my experience at least, and when we began the negotiation of the Convention for Persons with Disabilities, there were 670 million people with disabilities in the world in the year 2002. And I was approached to chair this working group and I thought, who could be against disability? It's politically incorrect. And I accepted this without thinking it through. And I suddenly met with very big challenges. The country that most opposed the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disability was the United States. And we had to get over that with a huge diplomatic effort and lobbying in Washington, with the help of people in the administration, from George Bush Sr. to his wife and everybody else, to get the Americans on board. But what does that mean? That's meant that 191 countries have signed the Convention on Disability. The world has changed in 20 years for the better, I think. You see the bumps and the slides in the sidewalks in every country in the world. But more than that, you see that we have the discussion is on the agenda, on the international and national agenda. Now you look at disability from another perspective. Now, if I want to interrelate this with aging, or with the demographic change of aging, I would say you're born with a disability or you acquire it during your life by accidents, by sickness, and certainly by war, like you see in Gaza or Ukraine today. But when you age, you will have some disability. And I think that you can call it Alzheimer, you can call it whatever other issue, but you're more prone to that. And if you're living longer than was expected before and you're reaching 90 or 100, you're going to have to deal with this in a collaborative way. So I do think that when you talk about the Davos Alzheimer Collaborative, which I have the honor of being an ambassador, I also think that you need worldwide cooperation beyond the geopolitical mess we're in, because this is a reality. This is what we will be living, what our parents lived or are living, what our family members are living. So what we're doing is a cause of a worldwide importance. That needs policy changes, it needs investigation, it needs people like yourselves who are doing an extraordinary job, the leap in technology. But we have a vision and we have the possibility of saying, we can do this. Now, the reality is that fertility, the lack of fertility is guiding a change in society, and we know this, and by the time we're looking into this issue, robotics will not solve all the working spaces, because what we'll need is a caretaker to take care of people who are in the situation. Now, how do we train carers? What are the practicalities? This is what we do in GIA. What are the practicalities of how we're supposed to meet these challenges with academics, with philanthropics, or with institutions who are dealing with this? Because it's a reality in the billions of numbers. And I think what you were talking about at the first question was, do we have the policies in place to do this? Do we have the political will of being able to cooperate and do this worldwide? And I think it might be a lesson for those who are reluctant that other countries in the world are doing it. And maybe that would be a lesson for us all.
Absolutely. Thank you, Minister. And you're absolutely right. It does seem like an interconnected problem, meaning not one tech company or investor or body can actually fix that. And one question I had for you, Patrick, as you listen to these panelists, perhaps there might be examples of public-private partnerships that already exist, that have been successful, that could be replicated, applied elsewhere geographically. I'm just curious if there are any success stories that are out there that we should be aware of.
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing this actually within our field, within the field of brain health. I like the way the conversation is moving here, because we started with the technical possibilities, right? What can happen through blood tests and through innovation coming to market. But then we start running into these other roadblocks, right? Political and cultural issues that lead us to have disappointing adoption rates for some of these very promising technologies and models of care. Was anybody here listening to this idea of having these blood tests for these horrible disorders and thinking with a sense of dread that maybe you don't want to know? Well, that's a very natural thing. I mean, where we've been for many years, especially in the Alzheimer's space, is one of dread. Folks didn't feel like there was anything they could do. And now we've got a lot of evidence showing all the practical things that we can do. Somewhere between 40 and 50% of all cases could be prevented through lifestyle changes. How many people around the world know that? How many people around the world have data about their personal risk and the practical things they can do given their lifestyle, culture, and the things that they could do? We've got studies going on around the world. The Worldwide Fingers Trial, I think, is in 60 countries now, looking at culturally adjusted, culturally appropriate lifestyle interventions that can slow decline or maybe even improve cognition in folks who are at risk of Alzheimer's. We're gathering the data now, but the first couple of countries showed really good results. How many people know about this? So when we change the culture to one of empowerment, put people in a position where they take control of their brain health, and now we give them the information they need to get really specific on a personalized basis, This is really powerful and exciting. We're totally changing the dialogue. And that's where the culture is going. We have very macro trends here that we're riding along with around consumer-oriented healthcare, with people using wearables and things like this. I'm sure a lot of people in the room are doing this. You're wearing your Oura Ring or using your Fitbit, and you're tracking these metrics, and you are actually thinking about maybe not drinking so much or maybe getting a little bit more exercise. And you could see that in that very next night have a positive impact on your sleep. And people are embracing this already, and we just have to build on that, knowing that we can do that, not just for how you feel on a day-to-day basis, but making day-to-day investments in your brain health that will pay off for decades in the future. The data is potentially there for us to collect and make available back to people, and then allow them to feel empowered in how they use it. So this is where we're going, and it's here already. You know, we just have to amplify it.
That's that's wonderful to hear. Tom, I'll come to you, and you're the last speaker to provide the solution. I'm just curious if you have anything to add. You did mention earlier that neuroscience is suddenly sexy. There's a lot more investment. People want to talk about it. Doctors want to get involved, and I think that's definitely a good sign. How we can expand on that? How can we double that effort?
Yeah, one thing that came to mind was the area that is maybe where government funding is not providing research dollars, and VC, it's too speculative for VC. And we were the beneficiaries of a DARPA program, US Defense program, and now that model has been replicated with a group in the US called ARPA-H, which is deploying, I think, like billions, I think, of dollars. China has now launched something an order of magnitude even larger than that. But that model that actually, if you look back at the neurotechnology pipeline now, especially in BCI, but also in neuromodulation, a lot of it came from that. You could consider that like an infrastructure investment by the government. Now, I think when Trump came in 2016, everything had to be military focused, so that program that was dual use stopped, but the investment was already, I think, several hundred million, and pretty much every company in the US that's coming up through BCI now has touched that program. So I don't know if the EU could. I think the UK just launched the ARIA program, which is I think $1 billion, and that's doing something similar. That's been a very if you contemplate a large program and think about it like an infrastructure investment, that can have a huge impact in the field. So I think there's still scope and potential for more programs like that to be done. And ARPA-H is doing a little bit of neuro, but I think actually the ARPA-H program is down on neuro. There needs to be more neuro.
Could I add something?
Absolutely.
So I think that's a great point. We've had a lot of federal subsidies or government subsidies, depending on whatever country it's in. But there are these new things that are being created, these FROs, these focused research organizations, philanthropically driven, like Eric Schmidt has started these. High net worth individuals have come together recognizing a gap that I think ARPA-H and even any of the ARPA-Es or any of the ARPAs haven't really filled still, because there's this very early stage stuff that has not been de-risked. And I think that whole continuum is now starting to get filled out. I don't know if that's happening, in the rest of the world, but we see a lot of that in the US. I would love to see if something like that could also get set up globally. But I think those are the sorts of things, because the market is recognizing the need, and then individuals are stepping up philanthropically, partnering with government, and then partnering with other entities to really drive enough capital to be able to do the kind of technology de-risking that we're talking about. So it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have one question here.
Great job. I know a lot about you.
It was this gentleman, apologies, the gentleman in the front. Yeah, of course.
Thank you. I just want to raise a point about something that I'm not hearing about at this session, or actually at any of the sessions. See, all of this is great. All the technology, all the advances, wonderful. The thing is that if we're really going to solve the problem of this growing population with dementia, we have to reach the people. And there is a basic problem in that is it's hard for people to come to the centers where you've got this technology. It's hard for people to travel to the physician's offices or research offices. And there is a simple solution that I'm not hearing tackled, and that is virtual access, virtual care. okay? And that can be done through, there's virtual research, there's virtual care. And in order to do, like for example in Africa, it is not available. So in order to fix that, we have to focus on how do we get virtual care accessibility.
Absolutely. Can I?
No, wait, I just want to take a drink of water.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so what I'm not hearing about is the solutions to getting, basically it's internet access. And it's not internet access just at the physician side, which is a problem in countries like, in continents like Africa. It's internet access for patients and for the public. And what we really should be doing, or I'd like to hear somebody say that they've got some innovation or innovative ideas to get this to happen. Because without that, none of this is going to go anywhere, other than to a small group of people. So I think that's a big barrier.
You want to take that, Patrick?
Yes, you probably saw me nodding enthusiastically. I completely agree with this. I mean, just talking about Alzheimer's, for example, we are going to see global prevalence triple between now and 2050, right? We'll be up to 150 million plus patients just in Alzheimer's alone. Has anybody heard about a plan to triple the number of neurologists? I mean, we already have massive shortages, but is any foundation working on that? Is any government working on that? Realistically, it's not going to happen. The only way that we're going to deliver care at scale is through the use of technology. We have to do this. And there are a lot of really interesting academic and early stage companies working on AI-based agents that can answer questions, reduce burdens on caregivers, and very importantly, streamline the interactions between the patients and the caregivers and the clinicians. Taking phone calls from folks and listening to the caregiver's story and questions, that can take a lot of time from an existing clinical care team. And we can go one disorder at a time and build AI-based agents that will actually help to vastly streamline those interactions. So the virtual access to directly interact with a clinician is a very important component of it, but also lessening the number of interactions that have to happen or making them much more efficient is also going to be critically important. Again, we've got to actually bring more information out to the patients and their caregivers so that they can use it as well. And so there's a lot of changing aspects of the relationship between patients and the clinic to do it. And virtual visits is one part of that, but it won't be the only piece of the equation.
Absolutely right. The thing is, even if it's not a person, a human, you still have to have access. So in remote areas, people have to access the AI. And if you can access the AI, it's no different than accessing a person. So what we really need is to get access to people. And that needs to be brought.
Great point. I think we're running out of time. We have time for 2 more questions. I'm going to go to that young leader over there who I had a pleasure to meet before the session. Why don't you go next?
I'm not very loud, but hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this panel. And building off that question, I was actually originally going to ask about regulatory approval pathways, because we've worked a lot on PDUFA and MDUFA in the U.S.
Your affiliation name.
Oh, yes. I'm Sneha. I'm with Generation Patient. We're a nonprofit representing young adults with chronic and rare conditions. We're entirely young adult patient-led and based in the U.S., but operate internationally. I think going off that question, one of the challenges that we face as an organization, and I know that's not unique to us as a community group, is that we feel like we have the solutions for a lot of these lifestyle changes. I mean, we alone have done nearly 600 peer support meetings, have evaluated the impact of our peer support intervention with Boston Children's on isolation, depression, anxiety. And so as we're thinking about solutions, do you see a role in the future for community-driven solutions that are not necessarily medical, but how do we scale these solutions up? Because we are severely underfunded, but we know what's best for our communities. And it's not costly. It's something that we've shown has an impact, and we want to scale this, but we don't often have the resources. So I think moving away from the VC space and whatever that looks like, what is the role for our communities to be elevated in this work?
Thank you so much, excellent. Anyone wants to take that?
Well, I totally agree with you. That I think that needs to be a public-private partnership. There are many examples of that in cardiovascular disease, diabetes, et cetera, where there's a whole model for healthy cities, resilient cities, and this is being rolled out. The concept of brain-resilient cities has not yet come out, but I think it's only a matter of time. So loneliness, for example, is a huge risk factor for dementia. There are many, many cities already planning their neighborhoods in such a way that there's cross-pollination, there's more mingling, there's more walking spaces, more green spaces. So all of that is going to be very important. But to be able to do that, we need to be able to measure. So in the US, for example, they've introduced something called the Environmental Justice Index, where every zip code, you can get a metric, 40 different aspects of socioeconomic factors, environmental factors, walkability, your ability to meet others, green spaces. So once you get a measure of that, then you can just develop policies to reverse some of the negative metrics in those kinds of environmental justice. And so I think it's very, very important, and it should be a priority.
Thank you so much, Murali. We have time for one last question. I apologize, we're running out of time. I see 6, 7 hands over there. Oh, I promised this gentleman here, so you get the last. Make it good. You're the last question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the insights to the panel. My name is Aladar Tepelea. I'm co-founder and CFO of Mindset Technologies, a Swiss company focusing on understanding the brain and understanding the brain without touching the brain. So my co-founder is a neuroscientist, and he played around with EEGs forever, but then he said, okay, so how do we actually get to the brain at scale, like this gentleman said before, using phones, using end-user devices. So at the moment what we do is we use data from simulators for pilot training, race car driver training, all sorts of environments where there's a digital interface. Now, we try to go into the healthcare direction, and my question is, how do you envisage early detection and diagnostic context as a business model? Who is going to pay? Is it going to be the pension fund providers? Is it going to be the healthcare providers? Is it going to be the patients themselves? How do we make diagnostics in the brain area a viable business model?
I think that was good. Who wants to take that? Thank you.
Well, it's going to be different in different countries. So in the US, obviously, there are codes. There are billing codes for diagnostics, so you'd have to go through the regulatory pathways, get the diagnostic approved or cleared, and then there are billing codes that the physician would bill for it. There are also codes for technology development that you can use to bill. Now, in other countries, if it's a public health system, the public health system would have to pay for it. In China, for example, they've done something very innovative where Eisai, a pharmaceutical company, has partnered with JD Health, which is one of the biggest e-commerce platforms, to create a global platform in China for screening for dementia, which is free. So they've linked every neurologist in the country on this platform, and all 250 million people over the age of 65 have access to it on their phone and on the internet. So they can take free tests, they get free brain health tips, and they can get a referral to the nearest neurology center to get diagnostic testing, et cetera, through the public health system. And all the records are linked. They can opt in or opt out of sharing their data however they want. Now, of course, this is China, so it's a different model. So it's different in different countries.
All right, thank you so much. I think we don't want to let you go just yet. We'll give you each 1 minute. Maybe start with Minister. Final thoughts. Again, keeping in mind you're talking to a web audience, businesses, governments, quite diverse. Anything you want to add as closing?
I think there are many lessons. I just heard about the issue in China. I was also in China and saw sustainable and autonomous living with technology answering the question with a linkage with medical health care, universal medical health care. And I was very impressed because there are 400 million people aging in China, and this is the way they're looking at it. So there are models. But I also have to talk about George's mentioning of solutions in the South. I think that the medical systems in the South are working on creative solutions at low cost because that's what we can pay. So there are many things to learn. Many of the solutions you're thinking about the North are really too expensive for the reality of the rest of the world. And 80% of the aging will come from the underdeveloped world. So what we need is creativity, cooperation, technology, collaboration in this sense, and I think the first ones to come with the solution have to look at this from a perspective of humanity and how many people are dealing with this. But it's a fabulous time because technology and the work you're doing, and congratulations for all the initiatives. I think that's what we need. Conversations like these around the world to look for solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Paul. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think, we've highlighted quite a few things, but what seems to emerge from many of these conversations is this idea that you have to have a holistic approach to this, right? It's not just the brain itself, but also the entire system of the body. But I think your question about communities is extremely important. If we don't address this, it's really a much bigger existential threat than I think that we've really appreciated. I think DAC is a great organization that's really brought this together, and being here, seeing so many passionate people. But all of those different elements have to be coordinated in a very deliberate way. One of the things that I think we've noticed, and historic examples are, you have to demonstrate before people really kind of get the idea that it's going to work. And so we're doing it in a smaller scale in Texas and in the region. And once we have these sorts of plans together and start actually developing and making these things happen, I think you'll start to see sort of a catalysis of more catalytic activity of more moving forward. You got to really have that going. So we have that ecosystem in Texas. We're partnering with as many people as possible to bring those communities together and bring the capital and the government, all the partnerships around it. We would love to see more of that, but I think you just got to get off the bench and start making it happen as quickly as possible with the right people. And I think that's what has been wonderful for the last few days about that.
Wonderful. Thank you. I agree. Murali.
Yeah, so I think we have to be proactive, not reactive, like we have been over the last 30, 40 years. We have to come together, which is what the DAC, Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, is trying to do, because there's too many silos. Everybody's got data. No one can access each other's data. And last but not least, we have to prioritize funding. I want to end with Mahatma Gandhi from India. He said, there's enough money for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. So that's going to be, I think, the biggest challenge. We have to break the links between poverty and mental ill health and brain ill health.
Tom?
I hate to use the catchphrase of the week as I'm hearing it everywhere, but I think just relevant to your comment about we have these, particularly in relation to Alzheimer's, where we know that there are these interventions that if we change our lives, we can actually offset this, but why aren't we doing it? What strikes me is the big catchword this week and last week at JP Morgan in healthcare has been agentic AI. So when your best friend gives you that bit of advice that you needed to hear and they're right and you have to go and make a change, I think AI, what's going to happen in the next couple of years, agentic AI is going to start telling us what to do. And people don't like that, but it's going to know what you should do, and it's going to tell you what to do, and that is scalable. And so I think that's what's going to have a huge impact especially in Alzheimer's and the ability to scale behavioral change en masse.
Great. Patrick, last word.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic about what you just were talking about, Tom, because I think, surveys have shown that people care more about their brain health than they do about their physical health. So if we give them this information, they're going to do the healthy things that they should have been doing anyway for their well-being generally. And so these agents can actually push people to do all kinds of healthy things for themselves. 3 things in closing. One is, I hope you're not missing what this is really about. We're starting to see the first preliminary shoots of lifelong human flourishing. If we do this right, we detect problems before they become big problems. We detect them as risks. We detect them at the early stage, and we can intervene and be more proactive the way Murali said. That sets up the possibility of lifelong human flourishing, which is really exciting. That's number 1. Number 2 is how optimistic I am. I've been in the field for more than 20 years now, and I can tell you, as recently as 8 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of optimism about cognitive aging and Alzheimer's. We had a long string of failures, and now we're starting to put wins up on the board. We are modifying the underlying disease. We are very quickly moving toward combination treatments. It's really exciting, and the momentum is behind us for sure. We are on the trail of many different culprits across all of these different neurodegenerative disorders, and it's really exciting. And lastly, If you think that a bunch of technical experts are going to solve this and then we're just going to sit around and receive their solutions, think again. If you are not a technical expert, if you're a concerned citizen, if you're a business leader, you need to get involved and engaged. We need your expertise. We need your instincts, your business instincts about how to bring these innovations to market, how to drive adoption of them, how to change policies and culture around this. Everyone in this room has a role to play in making sure that we can improve global brain health. And you do not need to be a neurologist in order to do it. I worked for Richard Rainwater, a private equity billionaire who was iconic as a business innovator. I worked for Bill Gates in his private office. These folks had profound impacts on the field, not because they knew anything about neuroscience, but because they had instincts about how to change the world. And you do too. That's why you're here. So I hope you'll get involved. And if you don't know how to get involved, come talk to me. I've got all kinds of ideas and can put you in touch with the right people who you can work with.
That's a wonderful note to finish on. Thank you, Patrick. Maybe one more round of applause for our panelists who chose to be here today. Thank you so much. I have a quick public announcement. There's another event happening here at 6:30 on the future of apologies, on the future of cancer care. If you're subscribed or registered for that, please come back at 5:30. Otherwise, we kindly ask that you let our staff to do the next setup. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.